In this video, we'll be talking about how chemistry gets confused with compatibility. So many of us lacking understanding of our own bodies and minds, our emotions, especially anytime we find ourselves attracted to someone, we are falling in love, we have all kinds of things going on that operate outside of the normal frame of what we're conscious or aware of. We have these very involved biochemical processes taking place. And then there's also our emotional wounding and the fact that for many of us, there's this profound disconnect. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've spent much of our lives disconnecting from our emotions, anything that feels unpleasant or uncomfortable. And it creates not only the disconnect from our emotions, but also from our physical bodies. We're not as connected, as present, as integrated. And so, therefore, we lack awareness. And so, because of that, when we fall in love, more than anything else, when we fall in love with someone or feel this profound attraction, it's eliciting these incredibly powerful biochemical processes within our brain. Probably goes beyond the brain. But in addition, there's also the fact that the emotional wounding that carries over from our childhood. Because of that, we have this multiple influences at work behind the scenes. And so the purpose of this video is to bring about greater insight, understanding, clarity. A few days ago, I filmed a video with my friend Naran Tillman. I just wanted to come back and film on my own this time because I actually have two different articles. And so if you want to listen to the recording I made with Naran, then that's a bit more humorous or playful and a lot of insight there too. And then I'll have other things that maybe I forgot to include that I'll hopefully mention this time. And I would encourage you as well to read the more in depth article because I tend to pack my articles with a great deal of valuable insight that the better you understand these things, the greater capacity you're going to have as you go into a relationship, as you find yourself attracted or forming attachment to someone, you're going to go in with greater self awareness. And for those who lack self awareness, which is all of us at some point, that could create a great deal of distress, unnecessary distress at times, pain, grief, sadness. So, to gain these valuable insights can spare you a lot of hell and heartache, or at least minimize it. I'm Ben Oofana, so let's dive into it. Chemistry, as most of us think about it, it's those feelings like that spark, that passionate flame of desire, the butterflies in your stomach, all these things, that animalistic urges, you just want to, your body aches for someone. And yet, it's actually much broader than that. We experience chemistry with everyone with whom we encounter or interact, everyone who's a part of our lives. I'll be touching on a few things that, in case you did happen to watch the other video, but anyway, it's good to reiterate a few things. And as I said, there will be a lot of new stuff in here too. So, whether you go to the supermarket, the store clerk, or your UPS driver, or anyone you encounter, if you're in school, your instructors or other classmates, if you're working, it could be your coworkers or your employer, everyone that you encounter, there is a chemistry of sorts. And it depends on the nature of the connection you have with that individual or just how you do or don't resonate with them. Some people, it's more of a flat or neutral sense. In others, maybe there's a strong aversion. There are people that can make your skin crawl and you just want to get away from them, or they just make you stress out and tense up when you're around them. And yet there are other people that we feel a sense of a common bond. We feel comfort and a sense of assurance and enjoyment when we are in their presence. So there's this whole range of ways that we experience chemistry with other individuals. And the more you do practice, for instance, I do a lot of meditation practice, and the practice is focused heavily on working with my emotions. And the more you work with your own emotional responses, things that are challenging you in life, and say you bring those events into your awareness and you process those stresses and those emotions, you develop a greater sensitivity. And so what happens is you develop a more acute awareness of how you feel in response to different people or situations. That gives you a lot of valuable insight, especially for me traveling in different parts of the world. And I would be, for instance, in Sri Lanka, and I'd be meeting, encountering all kinds of different people, and it could be quite dangerous there. And so sometimes I need to be able to sense into people and know where they're coming from, know what they're about. And so as I tune into my body and my emotional responses, I feel if that person's a bit dangerous, if it's someone I just need to get away from. I could also feel if maybe I just don't resonate with someone. At other times, I feel when someone has a good heart, when someone's genuine, and I feel the level of compatibility, the common ground that I have with different individuals. So the more that you learn to work constructively with your emotions, the greater your capacity to sense into people and understand either how you don't or how you do connect with certain individuals. So again, chemistry elicits, I feel there's a number of components to it. Sometimes it's just on an emotional level, how we feel about certain individuals. There are those we're neutral, others that we feel an aversion to, and then there are those with whom we feel comfortable, we feel a sense of enjoyment, and on a romantic level, there's attraction, desire. And there's, as I said before, that feeling of there being a spark, butterflies in your stomach, all these things. So a big part of chemistry, as I said, there's a biochemical process involved. So we encounter someone, especially when there's physical attraction towards that individual. We're around them and we feel a little nervous and anxious or giddy, and we feel this powerful draw to someone. And so there are these neurotransmitters that elicit this kind of response, neurotransmitters produced within our brain. Starting out, there's dopamine, and dopamine is responsible for these feelings of desire and longing and obsession, these intense cravings that we feel for someone, that we have to be with someone. There's also oxytocin, which is referred to by many as the cuddle hormone. Oxytocin elicits these feelings of love and closeness, and it's a very important part of what enables us to establish these deep emotional bonds. From what I understand, mothers at the time of giving birth and while nursing also produce oxytocin, and that's part of what enables them to form that attachment or their bond with their newborn child. Then there's serotonin. Serotonin, mood regulating hormone that helps to create an overall sense of well-being. So when we're in the presence of our romantic partner, we tend to feel this satisfaction and contentment in response to the person with whom we've bonded, that we're spending time with. It also creates this sense of comfort and ease during our interactions with that person, thereby enhancing our overall romantic experience. And then there's norepinephrine, which produces more of that heightened sense of arousal. And as I mentioned the other day, it's like that song by the Police. Everything she does is magic. You notice everything about that person, all these things that grab your attention that maybe you'd otherwise be like, okay, whatever, or oblivious to. And all of a sudden, everything about that person has this magical quality. It helps to create that motivation, that impetus, like, I got to talk to this person. I got to get his or her number. I'm going to call them and see if we can get together if they're available this weekend or tomorrow or tonight even or something. It's like makes us want to follow through. It also creates that nervous anxiety. Again, we always have a chemistry of sorts, but what we normally think of is these overwhelming feelings, all-consuming feelings of desire, and where we can't stop thinking about the person, and it just takes over us at all hours of the day and night. We imagine being together and imagine being intimate, all these things. So it's usually a lot stronger in the beginning. It is stronger in the beginning, with few notable exceptions. Even in the cases where there's an exception, there are some couples where, I think one example is Paul and Linda McCartney. From what I hear, they only spent maybe about 5 or so days apart during the time they were married. And part of those 5 days, Paul was in jail in Japan for possession of marijuana or something, or pot. But you see these couples, and there's this deep love between them, this profound feelings of affection. Now, with most couples, initially there's all that intensity of passion when they first get together. And then over time, there's a diminishment, and that decreases in intensity. For many, the couples that manage to establish deeper, healthier, more fulfilling long-term bonds, it transitions into more of a feelings of comfort and security. Still, there's a deep love, but it becomes more of a companionate love. So there's a change in the nature of that chemistry, as we call it. Now, there's also a darker side of chemistry, and it can become destructive for many. It could also be a profound opportunity. Destructive in the sense that many of us find ourselves attracted, forming attachments to, and it could become this very destructive spiral where we keep getting ourselves entangled with individuals who reflect back to us our emotional wounding. In some ways, they are a reflection of the individuals from our past parent or caregiver, in many instances, someone who caused us a great deal of hurt, emotional wounding. So we tend to find ourselves attracted to individuals who, again, reflect those people who hurt us in the past. And the more we're disconnected emotionally, the more we shut down, numb ourselves to our feelings, distract ourselves, self medicate with alcohol, other recreational drugs. Maybe we medicate with pharmaceuticals. But the more we're disconnected from our emotions, then it's harder for us to access our authentic emotional responses, and we need to access our emotional responses and process to digest them in order to gain the understanding and to facilitate the healing of these wounds. When we can't do that, then we tend to be attracted to the same kinds of individuals. And in many instances, our relationships become a reenactment of these early, deeply wounding experiences. They re traumatize us. And again, it can become a very destructive cycle. On the other hand, it can also be a profound opportunity when you have a commitment to learn and grow. And what I came to realize over time, there are instances where I attracted someone into my life and things weren't going quite so well. And so I would say to myself, like, okay, this person is putting me in touch with parts of myself that are still wounded. This person's reflecting back to me these deep emotional wounds that I'm still carrying some of this woundedness inside of me. And in many instances, our emotional wounding, even though we do a lot of work, there are so many layers to it. So maybe we've made a lot of progress, and yet there are deeper residual pockets of this emotional wounding or these reservoirs of pain and hurt and trauma that are way back in there, tucked away. And so what would happen is, even though I'd made a lot of progress for quite some time, I would attract someone into my life. And after a while, initially I fought it, but after some time, it's like, wow, this person is reflecting back to me work that I need to do. And so, to the best of my ability, I'd bring that person into my awareness, picture them. And as I do so, I would just notice what I was feeling, where the feelings are present in my body, go into those feelings while still holding them in my awareness, breathe from the depth of those feelings. It would help me to process those emotions, and also making use of the most powerful therapeutic interventions. And depending on what resources you have available to you, I recommend, well, some of you may work with a psychotherapist to help you understand your history, your family of origin, the patterns that stem from either childhood wounding or that even that have developed later on. Other interventions like deep tissue body work, making use of sensory deprivation flotation tanks when you get into that profoundly deep, relaxed state. Much of these emotions, these memories, a lot of what you're holding in your body, that could come up to the surface. As it comes to the surface, you work with the practice I just shared with you. It's going to make it easier for you to process or digest your authentic emotional responses. And that's critical for facilitating the healing and transformation of these deeply wounded parts of you. Because I've trained with a traditional Native American doctor, a medicine man, part of my training involves going alone to the mountains for 4 days and nights to fast without food and water. So when I'm on the mountain, those kinds of experiences, when I've gone through some reenactment of past trauma in a relationship, and I'll be on the mountain and all of it's coming back up. I'm reliving these experiences. I'm reliving the drama that's playing out in the relationship. And I'm, in many instances, I'm feeling the emotions much more strongly. The impressions are incredibly vivid. But I could feel this extraordinarily powerful presence working through me. I'm digesting that whole interaction with that individual, digesting my experience of that individual, all the sensory impressions, my emotional responses. But as I do that, what happens is it facilitates this healing or transformation of those experiences, all these emotional responses that in many instances are carryovers as well. You have the immediate experience, but also a carryover from early traumas or early deeply wounding experiences. And as that happens, it enables me to build or develop this whole new foundation from which I can relate, participate in relationships in a much healthier way. It gives me the opportunity to evolve on my own as an individual, but also within the context of my relationships. The vision quest is by far too intense for most individuals, and yet the fact that I'm trained by this traditional Native American doctor, I act as a conduit, allowing a very powerful healing presence to work through me. And those who have the opportunity to work with me one-on-one relate to me, share with me their own experiences, and I can observe this change, this transformation happening, that they experience the same kind of change or transformation within themselves and within their own relationships. So getting back to this whole thing about chemistry, there's an aspect of what we think of as chemistry that can be quite delusional. Our minds play with us, and again, largely because we're seeing through this filter, it distorts our vision, the filter of our own emotional wounding. And in addition, there's also those powerful biochemical responses within our brain. Again, the dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, norepinephrine, and other biochemical neurotransmitters, testosterone and estrogen, and there's more than that as well. But a lot of times, as we form attachments to these individuals and our minds construct these narratives that, oh, this person's my soulmate, we're twin flames, all these things. Maybe we imagine or we assume that, yeah, we were together in this other lifetime. And there may be other lifetimes. I don't know how to validate either way, yes or no on that. And I don't want to get into that right now. It's possible, but in so many instances, our minds construct these fantasies, these narratives. As we get caught up in this, as we read or project all this meaning onto this individual that we formed an attachment to in the relationship. And if anything, it can increase our emotional investment in that individual. As we increase our investment, we're more strung out emotionally, and it just adds to the complication. It makes it a lot harder for us to be objective and see this individual and our relationship with them and understand how we're connecting with that individual. It hinders our ability to clearly see what's going on in our relationships. And that can get us into an enormous amount of trouble. When you feel that chemistry with someone, it can be an amazing experience. It is this profound biochemical high. In fact, many of our drugs, opioids and other recreational drugs that many people use, part of the reason they're so effective is because they mimic the effect of these powerful neurotransmitters that are naturally produced by our own brains. So we have these neurotransmitters that are putting us into this altered state of awareness, and it makes it profoundly difficult to see this individual we formed an attachment to objectively and to understand what we're getting ourselves into. In many instances, we feel we have this chemistry with an individual, and it blinds us to the fact that, wow, that person's really not all that compatible with me. And we feel we have this soul connection, and we're feeling that spark and that excitement and feel that, oh, I've never loved anyone like this before. But again, it blinds us to the fact that on many levels, we're just not all that compatible. And the compatibility is critically important here. I mean, it depends because on on some levels, I know individuals and couples who they're each their own very unique individuals, and they have different interests, different passions, but there's a way they could come together and they could complement one another. Maybe they come from different cultures, but on some level, there's this profound resonance, and they're able to complement one another. And so I feel it's imperative for each of us. This is why I emphasize developing this capacity to work constructively with your emotions, because as you do so, you develop that heightened sensitivity, and you can recognize when you have this profoundly deep resonance with another individual. See, I tend to have friends from so many different cultures. Politically, I see myself as centrist, but I think others would see me as a bit more left. But yeah, I'll say I'm liberal, progressive in many respects. And yet I do have friends who would be considered very conservative. But on the other hand, I wouldn't want a partner, someone who's overly religious or conservative, because it would be very frustrating to me. There would be a lot of things I don't feel that we'd really be able to talk about. We'd really be able to have very meaningful discussions. Other examples of compatibility. Do you want children? How do you feel about having children? And if you have children, how would you want to raise them? If you do have a religious background, and if that's important to you, if you want to raise them in a religious context, other values around money, around lifestyle, how you want to live. If you want to live in the city, if you much prefer to live in the country, if you're the kind of person who likes to go out and party and hang out in bars, or if you're someone who is passionate. Yeah, for me, I'd really like to see this become a better country and better world. And so I like to be involved in ways that help other people. And so anything that I feel that helps to encourage constructive change within our society. And so I feel it's important that we understand those individuals with whom we're forming attachments, that we're becoming involved with, and that we have the sense of, is this the kind of individual that I can spend a significant portion of my life, that I could live with, that I could be deeply involved with on a long-term basis? How compatible, how workable is this going to be? And other things too, for instance, is this someone who just likes to sit around and watch TV and play video games? Or in my case, I like to go out and spend time in nature, go for long walks, go hiking in the mountains, all these things. So we need to be able to assess, am I really compatible with this individual? Do we have enough common ground? Do we have these places where we can meet? Are we just so profoundly different that inevitably there's going to be a lot of friction down the road? I mentioned, for instance, in the video I recorded with my friend Naran, how I connected with this woman that I met in Sri Lanka, and she's a flight attendant for Sri Lankan Airlines. I met her on a flight. And at the time I met her, had this attachment to someone else. But over some time, as I spent time with this other woman who's working as a flight attendant, I was feeling, and she was too, this intense chemistry. I don't quite know how to put it all into words. It was, I think both of us were just consumed by it, and we just wanted to spend every waking moment together, and physically, our bodies were melded together, and this constant physical contact and physical intimacy, and it was very intense, all-consuming. And even when I was away, I was back in the United States, she was so consumed with her passion that she couldn't wait for me to wake up. She felt like she had to talk with me and just wanted to hear my voice, and so my phone would be ringing at 2 and 3, 4 o'clock in the morning because she missed me and wanted to talk with me, and but that chemistry wore off after some time. It began to diminish, and as it did so, it just became more and more apparent that there were these profound differences. She cared a lot more about what her family thought. I don't. My thinking is that it's your life, it's my life, it's our life together. Let's make our own decisions. But one of the unfortunate things in it's always a trade-off, no matter what culture you go into. In South Asia, in many instances, people care a little too much about what their families think, and they don't quite have as much of a concept of boundaries. So people can sometimes be a little too inappropriately involved in the lives of their family members because of that. And there is also a profound intellectual gap. And as I said before, I wouldn't in any way want to diminish or criticize or attack her or anything. It was just there are these profound differences between her and I. And over time, it became obvious that, wow, okay, as this chemistry is diminishing, then there's this lack of compatibility. As I became more aware of the lack of compatibility, then the sexual component, that desire to be physically intimate, it's like that began to diminish as well. It just you just don't feel like being intimate. My former partner in Sri Lanka, well, there are some things that I was a bit disappointed about, especially the way it ended. And at the time, I felt hurt and felt upset, but now looking back in hindsight, I'm very thankful it didn't go any further. And I just wish her the best. I think she'd make a wonderful partner for the right person, and I am not that right person for her or her for me. But she didn't do any harm to me at all. It hurt a bit at the time, but it was an opportunity for me to do a lot of the deep internal work that I needed to do to heal. So in the long run, it actually worked out for me good. And I hope it's working out for her as well. However, many people being blind, oblivious to they're so consumed by the chemistry. And so what happens in far too many instances is they're so blinded by the chemistry and by the filter created by their emotional wounding. You're not necessarily conscious of all those emotions that are coming out, but it does create this filter through which you perceive that other person, through which you relate to them. It determines to a large extent too how they relate to you, how the whole relational dynamic, how it develops between you and this other individual. And yet, as I said, because we tend to go through life and we numb out to our emotions, we distract ourselves, we don't want to go there, we don't want to be vulnerable, we don't want to feel, it creates this blindness. So, one of the big dangers when that happens is it prevents us from truly seeing this person that we're forming attachment to or that we're in a relationship. It prevents us from seeing them for who they truly are. It blinds us to, in a way that we don't fully comprehend the kinds of distorted, dysfunctional relational dynamics that we are acting out. And so, again, that's why it's so critically important for us to take the steps to heal, to do the deep level emotional processing, like I described earlier in this video, and also to make use, to incorporate the most powerful, the most effective therapeutic interventions that we have access to. But you see many instances where people get involved with someone who doesn't have the capacity for exclusivity, for instance, someone who's easily distracted and is going to go, hook up with whoever else, even though you're supposedly, say you end up married to that person or you're living with them. And yet you find out that they got a Tinder account and they're swiping and they're hooking up with other individuals. Maybe you find their phone and you discover text messages from the other people they're hooking up with. Or maybe you discount or overlook the fact that that individual has a drinking problem, or they have a biochemical dependency on other recreational drugs. Maybe you don't pick up on the fact that you've formed an attachment to someone who's hugely narcissistic. And if you get yourself entangled with someone who's a narcissist in the early stages of the relationship, it's easy to, when they're love bombing you and things are still in that honeymoon phase, you're not going to see a lot of those really dark, destructive, manipulative, Machiavellian type qualities or characteristics in the individual. So again, this is why we need to be acutely aware, to sensitize ourselves, to be doing the deep level emotional work to heal, so that we're more grounded, we're more present in our bodies, so that we are more cognizant of what we are getting ourselves into, who we're getting involved with. I know that as I've gone through the steps to heal, early on in my relationships, the fact that I carried a great deal of trauma, I was still holding much of that trauma in my body. I was very numbed, I was very disconnected. And so I was blinded in many ways. I was oblivious to what I was getting myself into. As I continued to take the steps to heal and my sensitivity increased, I became much more conscious of what I was doing. I became much more self-aware of my self-aware, and also I became much more aware, much more sensitized to those individuals with whom I was getting involved with. A lot of times we just get involved with people who they're just not a good match for us. They're not bad people. There may not be anything really overly damaging or destructive or inherently wrong with them, but they're just not really compatible. They're not really a good match. And the more you do the deep internal work to heal and develop your body and mind, you develop this sensitivity. And if someone's not really a good match, you feel it. You can't miss it. I can still at times feel a strong chemical sense. I can still feel the chemistry sometimes, but it has changed. It's not so overpowering. It doesn't possess me. It doesn't take over me. While that can be fun, it could also be a bit dangerous. It can get us into enormous amounts of trouble. So it's actually better when we're more grounded. We could still experience that high, that biochemical high, the testosterone and estrogen and dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, oxytocin. We could still experience all that biochemical fun. It's free drugs. Well, I guess it's not so free if you get entangled with that individual and you pop out a few kids and then you realize you're not compatible, then you're gonna pay like crazy. It's gonna cost you a lot financially and emotionally and all kinds of unnecessary drama and wear and tear, and then you drag the kids through it too. So it could be a huge, big mess, which better we don't get ourselves into that. But the more aware you become, when someone's not compatible, you feel it. Like sometimes I could still feel that visceral physical attraction and that chemistry, and yet I just sense that it's not really a good match. At times in the past, there were women that I got involved with, and maybe some of these women themselves were deeply wounded. Maybe because of her insecurity, she had this need, like somehow she had to attract or by drawing attention from men. That's how she fed herself. That's where she derived her validation. And so initially she would be showing me attention, but then once I was hooked, then she would withdraw. And then there is this, because I was hooked and she would withdraw, it triggered that vulnerability, that insecurity within me. And so it was stringing me along and it was triggering my fears of abandonment. As I did the deep internal work to heal, what I found is that I no longer found that type of woman attractive. I would actually recognize that pattern. It actually felt very uncomfortable, not just uncomfortable, it felt repulsive to me. On one hand, I would feel some compassion for the woman. I could care about her to some extent, but it's like, nope, we're not going there. It's just keep a little distance there. Not a safe match, not healthy. Let's not go there. Conversely, as we take the steps to heal, what happens is our sensitivity increases. One thing I noticed is that I could feel when there was a greater resonance, when there is a balance. On one hand, you do feel the chemistry, but you could also feel the resonance. You could feel where you have common ground. You have enough of a foundation of these various elements that give you compatibility. And I could feel that I had enough common ground with these women that I could establish some kind of a meaningful relationship, a relationship that could sustain itself. Again, where so many of us get into trouble is that we equate chemistry with compatibility. And yet, chemistry can be quite deceptive. It could be our biochemistry at work. It can be the fact that we're seeing through this filter of our emotional wounding. And because we're so deeply wounded, we find ourselves drawn or attracted to individuals who are going to reenact our past traumas. So again, trauma bonding occurs whenever we're forming these attachments to individuals who are a reflection of, in some way, reflect the people who had hurt or traumatized us in our past and who reenact the traumatic experiences that we have suffered at various points in our lives. That was something that I went through. And there was a period starting in my 20s where, and I don't know, it's hard to break it down sometimes, how much of it was from the resulting from the reenactment of the abuses and traumas of my past. There are also instances where maybe we form an attachment to somebody, and that person, maybe they are very narcissistic. There's something about that individual and the way they operate, the way that we get involved with them, that is profoundly wounding. They create these devastating emotional injuries. What happens is because we disconnect emotionally, we shut down the pain, and we have a limited capacity to process our emotions. A lot of what ends up happening is that it creates this wound that gets deeply embedded within us. And because of this phenomena, this repetition compulsion, there's part of our psyche that on one hand tends to attract similar individuals and experience as though it's trying to bring these either individuals or experiences back into our life so that we'll face the issue and that we'll actually take the steps to heal. But again, most people lacking the understanding, lacking the resources, what happens is they continue to shut down emotionally, to numb themselves by shutting down, maybe self-medicating with food or alcohol, other recreational drugs. They go on pharmaceuticals, all these things. If we can't process our emotions, then what happens is all those emotions attached to those painful and deeply wounding experiences, it just gets pushed down in our bodies. And if we can't feel it, and if we can't thoroughly digest it, we're not going to heal. It's like the patterns just become more deeply entrenched. When I found myself doing that in my mid 20s, and it was causing me enormous suffering. And yet I was determined to do whatever it took to heal. First thing I did is start working with the psychotherapist. And many of you need to do that as well, because you're working with a skilled psychotherapist, a therapist that's very intuitive, has a deep understanding of this kind of wounding, these relational dynamics, and they can help you to understand, gain that cognitive understanding of the patterns that you're acting out in your own intimate or not quite so intimate relationships. Doing interventions like deep tissue body work. You're doing deep therapeutic massage, and it helps you to connect with your body and brings a lot of these emotions to the surface. And you want these emotions to come to the surface. When they do so, as I said, you're in a relationship or you're wanting to be with someone and it's triggering all these intensely powerful emotions. Acknowledge what's happening, acknowledge what you're feeling as it's happening. What are the feelings? Where are these feelings residing within your body? Bring your full awareness into the depth of these feelings and breathe softly and deeply, because as you do so, it's going to help you digest these authentic emotional responses you're having. And as you do so, you gain insight, you gain understanding. When I would get triggered and experience these intensely powerful emotions, and sometimes they were very painful, especially when I was dealing with these patterns of abandonment or unrequited love. But as I bring that individual and those emotions into my awareness, I'd breathe from the depths of those feelings. What I found that would happen is it would help me to dissolve those attachments. And it made it a lot easier for me to let go of those individuals, my attachment to them, and to the relationships that were just not working. My wounds were profoundly deep, and many of you out there who are listening, your wounds are also profoundly deep. And we can do a certain amount on our own. We need to do this practice. If we do not do the practice that I just related to you, if you're not processing your emotions, those emotions freeze up inside of you. And when the emotions are freezing up inside of you, it doesn't matter what you do then, because, well, maybe to some extent, but the more locked up you are emotionally, the more numbed out, the more shut down you are emotionally, the more that emotion's going to remain trapped in you. As that emotion is trapped within your body, it's like you're frozen, you're fixated. And with those emotions frozen, fixated within your body, it's like developmentally you're stuck. It keeps you from progressing. It keeps you from moving forward from, in this case, dissolving and letting go of those unhealthy attachments. It prevents you from gaining the insights, the understanding, the awareness you need to say, wow, that person's really not healthy for me. And that way of relating, what they're saying and doing, that's very harmful for me to stay in this relationship. It's destructive, it's damaging for me to hold on to that individual. And no, maybe they're never going to reciprocate your love. When you're shut down emotionally, you don't get it. You stay stuck, you stay frozen. And maybe the weeks, months, years pass, and that, I know some people, they stay strung out on an individual and it just goes on indefinitely. And they waste years of their life. And a lot of it is because this is what happens when you don't process emotionally. So you need to work, you need to learn this practice, this process that I teach, to integrate it, to incorporate it into your daily life. And again, make use of the most powerful therapeutic interventions. Do the body work, as I said. If you're hardcore like me, maybe you could go on a vision quest even. But I think very few people are going to do that. 4 days and nights, no food, no water, alone in the mountains. But for me, the combination of doing the practice and, as I said, working with my emotions, going on the vision quest, and that profoundly powerful presence descending into my body, I relive these experiences while I'm on the mountain. I feel myself digesting these experiences, this whole convoluted relational dynamics that I've gone through at times. My interaction with that individual, my whole sense of that individual, is that digest, as I'm processing it, I come out the other side and I feel I have a much greater foundation. I'm stronger, I'm more resilient. I let go of what's unhealthy for me. I continue to heal, to evolve. As I do so, as I continue to heal and evolve, then the quality of my relationships continues to improve. I attract into my life individuals with whom I can experience more meaningful and more deeply fulfilling relationships, romantically and otherwise, on all levels. Again, the vision quest, far too intense for most people, but as I said, so many people I've worked with over the years relate to me, share with me, and I can observe these changes taking place, are experiencing the same kinds of changes, the same kinds of transformation that I experience as I go through the vision quest. So if I could be of assistance to you, definitely reach out to me. I want to see you get into the best place you can be, and you too have more meaningful and more deeply fulfilling relationships. A lot to think about here and feel about. I'll let you go with that for now. Oh, and one more thing, do subscribe to my channel, like, share this video with anyone that you know will benefit. Thank you. Bye.